Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amyr Rocha-Lima.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast is brought to you by Holland Hahn and Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland Hahn and Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. I'm joined today by Joyce Ong. Joyce is the owner of Marketing Tech, a technology company that focuses on building clever, customizable apps and websites to help your business grow. What's unique about Joyce is how she's utilizing her 25 years of corporate marketing experience to champion local SMEs. Her experience in leaving the corporate world and facing the challenges of setting up her own company has given her the tools to help other small and medium-sized businesses in a really meaningful way. And be sure to listen to the end, where Joyce gives us some valuable tips around website design and shares some success stories on building your very own business app. So whether you're interested in knowing more about the role that marketing and technology can play within your business, or would like to know more about creating a successful business website or app, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Welcome, Joyce Ong, to the Inside Kingston podcast. Joyce, I'm really excited about this conversation because as a partner in a business myself, I'm only too mindful of the role that marketing and technology play in my own firm. I think our listeners can get a lot from your experience in this area. But to kick off this conversation, I'd like to go back in time if that's okay. So where did you grow up?
Right. Hi, Amir. First of all, thanks for inviting me to this podcast. To answer your question about me and where I grew up, I'm Singaporean. I still am. I've lived in Europe. I've lost count of the number of years now, since 2002. I mean, my background has been in banking, finance, doing marketing. The way I ended up in London was purely because I've always wanted to move here. I've always wanted to live and work here, and I'm glad to say I've realised my dreams finally.
That's fantastic. And what did you study at university, Joyce?
Surprisingly, it's nothing to do with what I do now, nothing to do with marketing or technology. I was a science student, and I remember loving maths. I did maths and biology, so wow. that was my major. And
then I also understand that you did an MBA here in the UK?
I did, yeah. I did my master's in Strathclyde, which is based in Glasgow. Yeah. So those were good times, yeah.
And Joyce, I'm curious, given that part of your work is marketing, but part of your work is technology, do you remember the first time you sat in front of a personal computer and the impact that made on you?
Gosh, how many years ago was that? I can't remember. I think the first time I sat in, well, maybe I might reveal my age if I say that. But yes, I mean, I remember I was in university, and that was my first contact with a computer. Of course, that's very different to kids nowadays. You know, they're in touch with computers almost the moment they were born. Yeah. But my first real contact was when I was in a university, and that continued on throughout my working life and my university life, of course.
That's fantastic. And can you tell us a little bit about your career journey to date?
Career journey? Sure. I've always worked for corporates. For the first part of my employment, I was in Singapore, and I worked for a big ad agency. And then I moved on to the client side, or so they say, working for the brands themselves. So my whole life was spent working for large companies, Singaporean companies as well as multinationals. And I started my business only when I moved to London in 2005. That's when I had my first experience working or actually starting my own business.
And could you tell us a little bit about the difference you felt for working for these big corporates to then running your own business and some of the lessons you've picked up from that?
Sure. I'm happy to do that. I think that the first, it was a culture shock for me coming from a large corporate background to SME or running my own startup. Well, first off, I didn't have the resources available. I had to start from scratch. I had to use some of my own personal funds to start a business, to grow it organically. I didn't have any external investment. So that itself was a bit of a shock because I realized that there were so many skills that were called for in running my own business, which I never realized I needed to have. And even though I did an MBA, that still didn't quite prepare me for what was to lie ahead. I mean, the MBA, to be fair, well, it was a good course, but that kind of taught me how to thrive in a large corporate setting, not so much how to start business or not so much how to be entrepreneurial. I mean, MBAs in those days didn't really prepare one for being an entrepreneur, so to speak, but rather in a large business setting where the functions of a business were very clear cut, and therefore, it gave me a good overview of that. But then funnily enough, when I made the decision to run my own business, I realized that there were a lot more skills which I hadn't learned. I had to just pick it up myself, such as, for example, building my own website. I mean, a simple thing like that. In those days, I mean, to us nowadays, a website is essential to running a business, and there are lots of software platforms that could help us do that relatively easily. But when I first started my own business in 2006, I realized I had to build my own website and I had to learn everything from scratch.
Yeah.
And that was my first contact with technology, so to speak. Having worked with a large brand, with a financial institution, my job was pretty much clear cut in those days. I had to take care of certain functions within marketing, and that was it. I was never really required to build a website, so to speak. So that was a bit of a shock in itself. So as for tips on what to do to make the transition smoother, shall we say, from corporate to SME, I would say, having an open mindset is really, really important, and being open to want to be able to learn new skills, to be able to accept advice from people who have been there and done it is really, really important. And I think there's something to be said about not having an ego, because if one comes from a large company background, then obviously there is a certain status attached, a certain ego attached to being in that particular role, in that position, earning that certain salary, if you know what I mean, and then coming down to actually not having an ego and having to start something, to be creative, to run a business based on your own wits, and to start it from scratch, and that requires a loss of ego, if that explains it.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
I think those are really valuable tips, because I'm sure that some of our listeners are in the corporate space today, and they might have this inkling to one day, perhaps soon, start up their own business, or perhaps quit the commute to London and work at a more local business around here in Kingston. So thank you for that. Tell us a little bit more about your business today, Marketing Tech. Why did you start it, and what does it do?
Yes, well, I started Marketing Tech about 3.5 years ago when I wanted to run a business that utilizes my core skills in a much more efficient way, in a better way. So my core skills being marketing, of course, and at that time when I started the business, I wanted to be more involved in technology as well, as I realized that marketing without technology. Marketing has changed and evolved beyond recognition over the last 10 years, or even the last 20 years, 10 to 20 years, shall we say. And I realized that a lot of marketing is now based on data, has become more scientific, is more digitalized, and therefore, even though having a background in marketing, I realized that I needed to be able to harness technology in order to be a good marketer. And so I decided to be more involved in technology. And then it was at that time when I realized that, I could utilize my skills, which I've built when building my first business in 2006. And utilizing that knowledge which I had as an SME, I then partnered up with a technology partner who then provided the tech support in order for me to support my customers, my clients, my business clients.
So that's really interesting, Joyce, because I think that a lot of people, when they hear talks or read articles about the use of technology in their business, some people go, yeah, but that's probably not relevant to my business. So with this in mind, could you tell our listeners here in Kingston, why is it important for them to think about the use of technology in their business?
I think technology in businesses, especially for small businesses, obviously it can help them to become more efficient, first and foremost. And also, I think that there's a lot of software technology out there that small businesses can harness. And sometimes they may not realize it in the day-to-day running of the business. For these small businesses, they may not have the time or resources to actually look into using, for example, a particular software platform that can help them to conduct their day-to-day business more efficiently. So I think that seems to be a gap there for, between the technology out there that's available, that's affordable, commercially tried and tested, and actually using that technology and translating that technology down to the small business owner, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And how about in terms of using technology to help with their marketing efforts? So, for example, mobile apps. What are some of the trends that you're seeing there?
Some of the trends I've seen are that small businesses are using mobile apps to help them with their marketing, for example, to help them become more efficient with their sales. For example, in professional services, some accountancy firms have started adopting mobile technology to help them to onboard clients in a more efficient way. So these are B2B businesses, and an application, a mobile application, just shortens the onboarding process for clients, for example. Or for restaurants, restaurants are one of the first early adopters of mobile technology in the sense that brands like Starbucks, Costa Coffee, Cafe Nero, for example, have started years ago using mobile apps to increase customer loyalty or to increase customer engagement with their customers.
And of course, part of your role is to help small and medium-sized businesses create and maintain their own mobile apps. I was wondering, what in your view, what is the key to a successful business app?
There are many types of business apps on the market, first of all. So the sort of apps that we focus on as a service provider, we focus on B2B2C apps. So basically, we would build apps that would allow the business to engage better with the individual, the customer. Yeah, so I mentioned B2B2C apps. So B2C apps is that space which we belong to. So we support businesses doing who deal with the customer, the individual. So the key to a successful app in this case would be two things. One is content. Small businesses, if they're thinking of developing an app, they should look at it from a strategic marketing point of view. i.e. do they have the resources, the time, and the staff, for example, to be able to refresh content regularly. I think that's quite key for a B2C marketing oriented sort of app, because you need to give your users a reason for them to come back and use your app, to visit your app. So if you don't have any new content to give out, to engage with your client, then with your customers, then they're not going to come back. And I would always say to my clients, when they think about developing an app, it's not a website. An app, it really isn't a website. So we shouldn't really treat it as such. And a website is something you build, and perhaps you don't refresh content for the next couple of months. That's fine. It's a lead generational tool. But with an app, you would constantly need to find reasons to engage, to attract your clients. And I think that's quite key.
So building on that, Joyce, and we talked about the fact that some of our listeners today might be in the corporate world themselves, but thinking about either joining an SME locally or starting their own company. So in thinking about the use of technology in a business, what advice would you give to a young entrepreneur or a startup?
Yes, I think the key thing to consider is the technology must be there to service the organization and not the other way around. I think sometimes businesses tend to look at technology as the next shiny new toy, in that they see other people have it and therefore they want it. So that's not quite a right approach to technology. So I think I always start with a strategic view of things. Do they need that technology? Do they need that tool for their business? And if so, how will that tool help their business? And just as importantly, how will that piece of technology help their team or their team members or the marketing team to do their jobs better? And it's not just the marketing people. In this case, it's also the frontline staff, for example, people involved in customer service occupations. They may be called upon to use the app or to explain the app, to the technology to the customers as well. And therefore, they need to be involved in the process right from the outset.
Yeah. And I understand that you're in the process of launching a course to teach business owners how to think about building their own apps or how to start.
I am, yes.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, of course. Yeah, yes, I'm happy to do that. The course I've developed is to be able to teach small businesses, to help them find out what's affordable, what's available, and what's tried and tested in the market. As I believe that this will help fill that knowledge gap within the small business market. Large businesses, of course, have plenty of resources and they are willing to invest, to test new tools, new technology all the time. But I feel strongly that with small businesses, we don't really have these resources. And therefore, I've developed a course to help them do just that. And that will hopefully help them to save tons of money, time, and stress as well. And this online course I've developed is called Get Repeat Sales with an App in 90 Days Without Breaking the Bank, in brackets. And this course would cover the strategic questions that businesses need to ask themselves when they decide on a mobile app. And also, the course would also go through some mobile app trends, some global trends in the US and UK as well, which may impact their business, their small business. And these are useful trends that I feel would help them in that decision. And also, in the course itself, I will then talk about some key features of mobile apps that are available today that they can adopt for their business, and also talk about what sort of businesses would suit mobile apps. Where apps would fit in a marketing mix. So, for example, if a small business needs more customers, needs to generate more leads, then they may need to, for example, consider putting more of their budget into just upgrading their website. It could be as simple as that, but it's a very key decision right from the beginning. Sometimes they need to invest more money. They just simply need to invest more money in upgrading their website, in incorporating or integrating certain tools to their website to make it more mobile friendly, rather than investing more of their money into a mobile app. However, having said that, if a business is more established and lead generation is taken care of, so to speak, they have a newly updated site and they just want to be able to engage with their customers in a more meaningful, interactive way, in a way that a website or social media can't really achieve, for example, then that may perhaps be the time for them to consider adopting a mobile app. So these are just two examples. Of course, I mean, it really depends on the type of business.
Sure.
Who's making these investment decisions.
What's really interesting about that, Joyce, is throughout the process of these interviews and conversations I've been having with local business owners, there just seems to be so many similarities between businesses that, on the face of it, have absolutely nothing to do with each other. So in your description there of the service your course is aiming to offer people, it just made me think about our own financial planning process, where our goal is to get people to think about the expensive mistakes that could happen throughout retirement and to avoid those. So all I can say to listeners is just contact Joyce if you can, to think about the expensive mistakes that you should avoid before embarking on a website redevelopment or even setting up your own app. So definitely thank you for that, Joyce. Joyce, you mentioned there some of the upcoming trends that you'll be covering in the course, and without giving too much away, could you just give us one or two examples of upcoming trends in technology and marketing that you're seeing you've seen out there?
Yeah, so I one of the trends which I talked about in the course is consumer buying behavior, online consumer buying behavior, which I find really fascinating. In the course, I discussed some trends, some research conducted by Salesforce, which interviewed 4,000 individuals across 4 countries. So it's quite a substantial database of customers, asking them how do they do their research? I think the question that was asked was, how do they conduct research? Which channel do they use when they conduct their research in making a decision on buying a product or service? And so the research was split into millennials, into Generation X, and baby boomers, these 3 demographic groups. And it was quite fascinating to see the similarities as well as the differences in online consumer buying behavior when it comes to researching a product or service before they actually make the decision to buy. There are some similarities between millennials and Gen X, and in fact more similarities between these 2 demographic groups compared to baby boomers, who would tend to, for example, focus on the website or email, 1 or 2 marketing channels, whereas the trend now towards the millennials and the Gen X is more towards accessing a business that they don't know much about. They're just researching across different marketing channels. So that to me is a very strong signal, which tells us that it's really not enough to have just one marketing touch point anymore. Perhaps 10, 20 years ago, having a website was a big deal, and therefore that's the be-all and end-all for a business as far as marketing is concerned. But now people are expecting to be able to access a business that they don't know much about from social media platforms, from a website, from a landing page, as well as a mobile app. So these are, so it is quite surprising, the trend over the years, and that's quite revealing for small businesses.
That's fascinating. Joyce, I feel that you have a great presence on social media. I can really get a vibe for you and your personality through the videos you post and some of the articles you post too. Could you tell us a little bit about how you use these social media tools to grow your own business?
Sure, yeah. For me, because I deal with small business owners, and I also work locally with small business. I do very much support small businesses locally within the borough of Kingston. I tend to use LinkedIn a lot to connect with local businesses as well as businesses in London. And I find a fantastic platform to set up meetings, for example, to approach businesses for collaborations, or simply just to find out more about a particular business I may be interested in approaching. I like Instagram personally. I find that it's a very creative platform, and it's very visual, and I enjoy using Instagram. So I use
really
both
good.
platforms quite a bit.
That's really good. What are some of the key business lessons you've learned throughout your life?
Okay, I think the key lesson I've learned starting and running my own business is that despite technology being there all the time now to support us in doing our jobs, in running our businesses, I think at the end of the day, to avoid using a cliche, it's still the people that count. So I think the technology is always there to support us, but at the end of the day, I think no piece of technology would beat a phone call, for example, to someone that I've met in a networking event. That still, trumps everything, and keeping these relationships going with the help of technology is key. And to do that, you still need a human touch.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating how I think you're an example of this, of how you use technology to leverage the work that you do face to face with your clients and prospective clients. And that's probably the way to go, isn't it, really?
Yes, that's right.
Joyce, what next for you and your business? Are there any projects in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
Yeah, of course. I have worked with some local businesses, I'm proud to say, and I have built up a good relationship with brands locally, like TEDx Kingston. We did some work for them last year when they were organising a flagship event at the Kingston Rose Theatre, and they're doing another one next year in January as well. So we built an app for TEDx Kingston, and also a local business, Super Sitters, which is a local business offering childcare. They are now doing very well and therefore expanding quite rapidly as well beyond the borders of Surbiton. So I'm proud to say that we've built a website for them, incorporating a calendaring system as well as a booking system for their clients. And right now we're working on a project with the Chamber of Commerce, Kingston Chamber of Commerce, and that should be launched in November this year.
Oh, wow.
But don't hold me back to it. No, don't hold me to it. But that's the plan, yeah.
Fantastic. That's really good. As we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So, Joyce, what do you do to relax outside of the office?
Well, I love visiting restaurants, trying out new foods, and travel as well if and when I can find some time to do so. And I enjoy Instagram.
Excellent. Are there any books that you've recently read that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Yes, I could recommend. The books I'm reading at the moment are mainly non-fiction books. So for people who are interested in a topic, because I'm now developing courses, I have now started exploring topics such as affiliate partnerships. So that's there is a book I can recommend on affiliate partnerships, and it's written by a chap called Philip Gibb, and he writes about developing online courses and how we can, as a course creator, there's always a course in every business. There's always some useful knowledge that we can share to the rest of the world, and therefore developing online courses allows us to develop a product that could be shared worldwide, globally, rather than just on a one-to-one basis. So that kind of supports the business that we already run by developing a course. And he goes on to teach us how to form affiliate partnerships with partners who have a similar customer profile to our business, and how we could develop content closely in partnership with these affiliate partners who are non-competitive, and yet we share roughly the same customer profile in order to widen our reach, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sounds like a very interesting book. Are there any movies or TV shows that you've recently watched that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Sure, I recently come back from a long flight, so I can say that I've spent the last 12 hours sitting on that plane watching loads of movies, and we've also enjoyed some TV programs as well with my 12-year-old daughter. So I have to say I love Stranger Things, and she loves it as well. She's 12, so she's just the right age group for that. And it kind of reminds me of X-Files, if you see what I mean. I love watching X-Files many years ago, and that just reminds me of the X-Files. A TV show, actually, Big Little Lies.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that too.
I think it has one of the best soundtracks of any TV show ever.
Good soundtrack.
Amazing soundtrack.
And I love that. I love that particularly because I just came back from a trip in the US, and we've gone past that very same bridge on the Big Sur, which was featured in the opening song of Big Little Lies. And I loved it. I just enjoyed it. I made it a point to for us to drive across that bridge just so I could see for myself what it was like.
That's amazing. Finally, where can people go to find out more about you and your business?
Yes, they can go to my website, which is www.marketingtech.london. Or if they like more information about the course, which I mentioned, which is Get Repeat Sales with an App in 90 days, all they need to do is just Google Get Repeat Sales with an App in 90 days, Thinkific, so that's spelled Thinkific, and you see the link to my course near the top of the first page of Google, so you can find me there. Or if you have time, do sign up to attend my talk on the 10th of September at the City Business Library. So I'll be covering bits of my course during that talk as well at the City Business Library. Again, you can find the link to the Eventbrite page of that talk on that same page of Google.
Yeah. And for the benefit of our listeners, I'll make sure that I link up to all of those resources on the show notes.
That's great. Thank you.
Joyce, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story.
Thank you. Thanks, Amyr.
That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.